Hey everybody, video number 7 on Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me. This one covers pages 99 to 119 officially, but what I'm going to do in this video is go over the 3 different components of DuBois' argument, how they appear in Coates' book, and then how Coates has kind of modified those arguments or updated them or mutated them, whatever, adjective you want to use. Verb, actually. Bad language arts teacher. That was a verb. Anyway, so this video specifically is to kind of give you some ideas for your compositions, to help you out, some guidance as to kind of where to go with it so that you can be successful on that assignment. So, to review, W.E.B. DuBois in The Souls of Black Folk talks about 3 different components affecting Black society. There's the veil, which is the barrier that separates white and Black culture. There's the Negro Problem, where whites perceive Black people as a problem economically and don't know quite what to do with them. And then there is dual consciousness, where Black people have to constantly not only be aware of who they are as people, but how white society views them and how that affects their own perception of themselves, right? And I apologize for using the adjective they. It sounds demeaning. I don't mean it to sound demeaning, but as you can tell, I'm pretty blanco, so take it for what it is. So let's go through each of these. Let's start with dual consciousness. So DuBois, specifically with his dual consciousness, was really talking about, we're talking about post-war, antebellum, Jim Crow law era America. DuBois is talking about how Black people always have to be conscious that white people view them as getting in the way, or not being as intelligent and not having the same attributes as white people. Where Coates goes with this is he brings it up in context of parenting, right? And about kind of that ghetto mentality, to use a really bad phrase, to be honest. But you think back to way back in the beginning when he tells that story about running off from his parents in the park, and dad says, I can beat him or the police can, right? This is the dual consciousness that Coates is talking about in this novel. This idea that, you want to be, as a parent, you want to be loving, you want to give your child opportunities, you want to give them freedom, right? You want to give them every chance to be the best person they can be. But if you're Black, you've also got to teach them the rules of being Black in white society, right? So you can't just run off in a park by yourself. Somebody is going to become suspicious, and they are going to, as we saw just a couple weeks ago, call the police if all you're doing is having a barbecue, right? And the police are going to come, and it's going to be a big deal, right? You can go on Twitter, you can go anywhere on Reddit, you can go anywhere right now, and you can find videos of white people being overly suspicious of Black people just living their lives or doing things that white people can do without anybody even blinking an eye. So this is the dual consciousness that Coates is talking about in the novel. There's an added element of fear to it that isn't in DuBois. DuBois, it's mostly about this wariness, this unease, and it's really evolved into this fear, right? Where he even talks about it in terms of the police. When the police, what do you do when you're driving, to not attract police attention? And then even if you do get pulled over, having to not stand up for yourself, not having to, kind of look at the ground and say yes sir, no sir, sorry sir, right? Things that, as we see, you can go in videos again, white people can cuss and scream and throw things and be violent, and nobody blinks an eye. Maybe a cop pulls a stun gun or something like that, but it's never to the extreme that happens with people of color. So this is part of the dual consciousness that he's talking about, is that you know parenting become there's a split in parenting, there's a duality there, but also in how black people kind of govern or enforce the laws in their own areas, right? He has that big section about knowing who runs what block and who goes with what and who's doing this and who's doing that. Excuse me, it's late. But always being conscious that that only works within these boundaries. Outside of these boundaries, those rules don't apply. And if somebody from the outside comes in there, then that crisis of duality hits. So there's that. Let's talk about the veil. DuBois, the veil is mainly an economic thing, right? So the closer black people get to the veil, meaning they go from being essentially indentured servants or, migrant laborers, and they get closer to being like business owners, or even maybe a little bit of political influence or something like that. As you get closer to that veil, you see that there's a barrier and you don't have the opportunities that are available to white people on the other side, both economically and politically. And there's nothing you can do about it except stand there and look at it and be really upset, right? So Du Bois's veil is focused mainly on economics and politics. What Coates does is he kind of brushes a lot of that aside. And when he's talking about the veil, he uses different metaphors. He talks about the dream, right? So the American dream is what that can be interpreted as. Martin Luther King's dream. So the dream, the idea that, there is an ideal society where black people can just live their lives how they want to live their lives without fear of, losing their body at any point, without fear of repercussion. He also, at one point in the section you should have read for today, talks about the idea of a mountain, right? And that white people are up on this mountain and they need something to look down at. And if any of you have ever gone mountain climbing, right, or even like gone to the base of Mount Hood or driven through the mountains, going up the mountain is way more difficult than coming back down. So there's this barrier, right? And when he's talking about these barriers, the dream, galaxies, mountains, whatever terms he couches it in, he's talking about not only wealth, economics, and politics, but mostly about the idea of accountability. That on the other side of this barrier, there's no accountability for what you do to somebody on the other side of the barrier. So if you are up on this mountain and you cause harm to somebody who is not on the mountain, nobody on the mountain is going to fault you and frankly do much of anything about it, right? He talks about usually those people just get pensions, they get, paid administrative leave and things like that. And it's not just police, although he does spend a lot of time talking about police. It's anybody who is put in charge of black people, right? So he talks about teachers as well, kind of using the barrier of, school. Well, it's a system. There's nothing we can do, right? And there's just no teaching some people, which is nonsense. So his veil is really about accountability. And he talks a lot about police violence in these terms, right? How at any point a police officer, and he goes out of his way to to state that it doesn't matter what the skin color of the police officer is. At any point, a police officer can take possession of a black body, do harm to a black body with almost no repercussions. It is rare. It is really, really rare that a police officer will actually be charged with any kind of crime or wrongdoing when they commit violence or unlawfully incarcerate or murder a black person. It's very rare that that happens. It's even rarer that that leads to a conviction, right? We're talking about fractions of fractions when we're talking about, guilty verdicts in terms of violence against black people by those in authority. And he goes on to say that it's not really the individual police officer's fault. They are a product of a system of violence that has been in place for hundreds of years and has been allowed to exist for hundreds of years with nobody really stopping and saying, we have a problem here and this needs to stop, right? So that's the veil he spends a lot of time talking about in the novel, that accountability veil. The last one, and the one I find the most interesting, is the Negro Problem. Again, DuBois was focused more on the economics of the Negro Problem, how post-Civil War, right, all these newly freed slaves or runaway slaves who don't have to worry about, getting sent back to their masters, now have to go out and find work, right? And the Negro Problem is what white people think of black people, how they've now become this burden. What are we going to do with all these black people? They don't have a lot of education. Educating them is going to be really expensive. And do we really know if black people can be educated or not? We're not sure, right? So that is the Negro Problem. Coates takes it a whole giant leap further. And it's not just about economics. It is a system of dehumanization, right? Black people are perceived as a burden, as an unwanted burden, something not worth taking the time or effort to really try to right the wrongs of the past. So instead of taking those steps, giving up some power, giving up some wealth, giving up some influence, so that the playing field can be more even, we would rather dehumanize black people, label them, start to view them in terms of more like animals than people, because then it becomes easier to ignore them, to vilify them, to incarcerate, and eventually eliminate them, right? Much easier to get rid of a problem than to deal with a problem, right? If your Xbox, gets the blue ring of death or whatever it is, it's way easier to just chuck it, buy a new one, and go on with your life than to take it apart and try to figure out what's going on, right? Because it's a lot of time, it's a lot of hassle, right? And it's going to expose that you probably don't know as much as you think you do, and there's some humility in that when you try to fix something and you just can't do it because you don't know. And that is where white people are. The problem is that we have we have not set up minorities, people of color in this country to be successful, to live their full lives, to live without fear of losing their body. And instead of admitting, we instead of being humble and saying, wow, we really screwed up and we really need to take a step back and rethink things, it's much easier to just say, you know what, they've had, Civil War ended what, 100 and almost 150 years ago now? Yeah, come on. Right? You've had 8 generations to get yourselves out of the dirt, and you haven't. So that's your problem. And who else can't do any better for themselves? Animals can't do any better for themselves. It's not like the 10th generation of goat is finally going to run for mayor, although I guess a sheep or a goat could win mayorships. It's happened. And I'm being very glib to kind of prove a point in that dehumanization is the easiest way to get rid of a problem, because then we don't have to employ empathy, right? And he talks a lot about this in the section you read for today. So 99 to 119, he really focuses on this idea of dehumanization and how it's been a systematic since, pre-slavery, a systematic label system, and then fruit fly labeling and dehumanization effort to justify treating people like garbage, incarcerating, ignoring, and eventually eliminating them. All you have to do, if you don't believe me, is just, today is May 22nd. Rewind about a week or so and look at comments that a certain person in our government made, some comments he made about immigrants to our country, especially those from Mexico, right? Who they want to instantly label anybody who is an immigrant from Mexico as probably a member of MS-13, right? Called them animals. Animals. You don't talk about people. Even if a person is a member of MS-13, that is still, as Coates talks about in this section, a person that has dreams, that has thoughts, that has the same feelings that we do, right? They're not an animal because they're the member of a violent gang. They are people, and that I think is, for a lot of us, difficult to remember, right? And so it's easier to dehumanize them so that we can dismiss them and possibly just massively incarcerate all of them, right? Deport people who look like MS-13 gang members, even if they may not be, and there's no evidence to prove that they are, or to just kind of gun them down and say, well, I felt threatened. Oh, I saw a gun. Even with no evidence of a gun, right? This is also the same thing that happened in Nazi Germany. It was how the Nazi regime got the German people to go along with the idea of vilifying the Jews. Make them seem like pigs or less than human, because then it's easier to get rid of them and there's no accountability to go back to the veil. All right. So those are the 3 aspects. Hopefully that gives you something to go off of. Remember, you want specifics out of the book. Don't just quote me, because I tend to paraphrase because I read it and I kind of glue it into my brain, and sometimes it's not 100% correct. Plus, I didn't tell you any page numbers. So good luck on your composition. There should be one more video that will cover the rest of the book. Hopefully that'll be out soon so that you can use that in your writing. Have a good night, have a good day, have a good afternoon, wherever it is you're watching this. Goodbye.